Sometimes, revenge doesn't destroy lives, it rebuilds them. This is the story of a man who tried to hurt his father and ended up healing his own heart instead. From the moment he was born, the doctor lived under the shadow of his father's ambition. His father, a man of towering wealth and unbending pride, believed that money was the ultimate measure of success. To him, reputation wasn't just important, it was everything. He built an empire in medicine, a hospital that stood as a symbol of his power and influence. Every corner of that building whispered his name, and every employee knew that crossing him meant the end of their career. He was the kind of man who demanded obedience from his staff, his associates, and even his own son. The young doctor, brilliant and compassionate by nature, admired his father's achievements but loathed his arrogance. He grew up watching his father treat patients like transactions and nurses like servants. Compassion was considered weakness in that household. Only profit and prestige mattered. From childhood, the son wanted to be a different kind of doctor, one who healed with heart, not hierarchy. But every time he tried to speak of empathy or kindness, his father dismissed it as naivety. Medicine is not charity. His father would say coldly, "It's business. Never forget that." These words carved resentment deep into the young man's soul. As the years passed, the tension between father and son became unbearable. The father expected his son to marry into wealth, a business tycoon's daughter, perhaps to merge power and privilege, but the doctor wanted to break free from that gilded cage. He had spent too long pretending to fit into a world that didn't align with his conscience. Every dinner at their mansion felt like a performance, every conversation like a battlefield. The father wanted control, the son wanted freedom. What began as silent rebellion soon transformed into open defiance. And one day, when the pressure became too much, the son decided to make a choice that would shock everyone. He met her, a poor girl from the countryside, by chance at a community clinic. She was not the kind of woman his father would even acknowledge. She came to the clinic not for herself, but to help an old neighbor who couldn't afford treatment. Her clothes were simple, her hands calloused from hard work, but her eyes carried kindness that no diamond could imitate. She thanked the young doctor not just for his help, but for listening, something his wealthy patients rarely did. That moment changed something in him. For the first time in a long while, he felt seen not as the son of a rich man, but as a human being. When his father discovered the growing friendship between his son and this poor girl, he erupted in fury. "You will not disgrace this family," he thundered. "You were born to continue my legacy, not to destroy it." But the son had made up his mind. He was tired of being treated like an extension of his father's ego. He wanted to make a statement to prove that he could live without his father's approval, without his fortune, without his name. So, in an act of raw defiance, he married the poor girl. Not out of love at first, but out of rebellion. It was his way of saying, "I don't need you anymore." He thought that by cutting ties he could finally breathe. But rebellion, though liberating, often carries a hidden cost. The moment he walked away from his father's mansion, he also walked away from the privileges that once defined his life. He lost the comforts he had taken for granted: the house, the car, the respect. His colleagues whispered behind his back, calling him foolish. His father disowned him completely, declaring that he was no longer my son. Yet, even as he left with nothing but his pride and his new wife's trembling hand, the doctor felt a strange mix of fear and relief. For the first time, his life was truly his own, but it was also uncertain, fragile, and uncharted. He had won his independence, but he had no idea what the price of rebellion would be. When the young doctor brought his new wife home, a small rented apartment far from the luxurious mansion he once lived in, reality hit hard. Gone were the marble floors, the servants, the lavish meals, and the air of entitlement he had breathed all his life. The rooms were modest, the furniture second-hand, and the silence heavy. Yet in that humble space, something quietly beautiful began to grow, not wealth, but warmth. His wife, the poor girl everyone looked down upon, filled the tiny apartment with life. She had no jewels to wear, no fine dresses to display, but her smile carried a light that money could never buy. Every morning, she would wake before him, preparing breakfast from what little they had. Sometimes it was just bread and tea, sometimes nothing more than leftovers from the night before. Yet she served it with gratitude, never complaint. The doctor, used to luxury, often found himself silently watching her as she hummed softly while cleaning or cooking, as though she carried a melody of peace within her. Her calmness unsettled him at first. How could she be content when life had given her so little? But gradually, he realized that her peace came not from possessions, but from purpose. She had learned long ago that happiness isn't found in what you own, it's found in what you give. The townspeople admired her humility. Even though she was now married to a man of education and prestige, she never treated anyone as beneath her. When children fell sick in their building, she would bring them soup. When an old neighbor struggled to climb the stairs, she would hold their hand. Her kindness rippled quietly through their community like sunlight spreading through clouds. She never boasted, never sought recognition. It wasn't in her nature to seek applause. Her greatest joy came from seeing others smile. Slowly, her gentle goodness began to melt the walls of pride that the doctor had built around his heart. At first, the doctor couldn't understand her strength. He thought she was simply naive, that she didn't know how cruel life could be. But one evening, as they sat under the dim glow of a single bulb, he asked her, "Aren't you afraid of losing everything?" She smiled faintly and replied, "You can't lose what you never owned. You can only lose your peace, and I won't let the world take that from me." Those words hit him harder than any insult his father had ever thrown at him. He realized then that while he had always lived in fear of failure, of judgment, of not being enough, she lived in freedom. She had nothing to prove to anyone. That kind of strength, he learned, was far rarer than wealth. There were days when money ran short, when bills piled up, and patients were too poor to pay him. The doctor would grow frustrated, pacing the room, blaming fate, blaming his father, blaming himself. But she never joined his anger. Instead, she reminded him of the power of perseverance. "We have enough," she would say softly. "You have your hands, your heart, your skill. You can rebuild everything." And somehow her words always gave him courage. It wasn't the kind of encouragement that shouted. It was the kind that whispered truth when the world grew loud. She taught him to see failure not as an end, but as a beginning disguised in hardship. With time, the doctor began to see his wife through new eyes. He started noticing the small sacrifices she made, skipping meals so he could eat, selling her jewelry to pay for medical supplies, comforting him when patients died under his care. She was not just a wife, she was his silent backbone. Her humility was not weakness, it was resilience dressed in gentleness. The world had underestimated her, just as he once had, but now he saw that her strength came from love. And love, in its purest form, was the most powerful force he had ever encountered. And so, while the doctor's father sat in his mansion surrounded by luxury but starved of peace, the son and his humble wife built a different kind of kingdom, one built on kindness, patience, and understanding. She never needed to teach him with lectures or logic. Her actions spoke louder than any sermon. Through her, he began to realize that true greatness lies not in wealth or position, but in the ability to love selflessly, to endure quietly, and to rise gracefully above pain. As time passed, the doctor began to feel the weight of his choices pressing heavily upon his heart. The first few months after the marriage had been driven by pride, the desire to prove his father wrong. But now, stripped of wealth and privilege, he found himself facing the uncomfortable truth. He hadn't just rebelled against his father, he had also betrayed himself. His decision, once fueled by anger, now revealed its emotional consequences in the quiet hours of the night. When the noise of the world faded and he was left alone with his thoughts, regret would whisper to him like an unwelcome guest. He would often sit by the small window of their apartment, watching the city lights in the distance, the same city that once admired him. He had been a respected doctor in one of the best hospitals, his name tied to his father's reputation. But now, his father's influence had shut every door in his face. Former colleagues avoided him, invitations stopped arriving, and patients were scarce. His pride, once his armor, now felt like a prison, and yet, beside him, his wife remained steady, soft, spoken but strong, comforting but never pitying. She never said, "I told you so." Instead, she would quietly place a cup of tea beside him and whisper, "You'll find your way again." But the doctor's war was not with the world, it was within himself. He found it hard to accept kindness because guilt had made him bitter. There were moments when he looked at his wife and wondered if she deserved better, if he had dragged her into a life of struggle because of his foolish pride. Sometimes he wanted to apologize, but his ego silenced him. Other times he wanted to start over, but fear held him back. He was trapped between two worlds, the one he had left behind and the one he was trying to build. Neither felt like home. His heart was torn between shame and hope, two forces constantly battling for control. Every day at his small, underfunded clinic, he met people who reminded him of his father's patients, the poor, the voiceless, the forgotten. Unlike the luxury hospital where he once worked, these people came not with wallets, but with worry. Mothers who couldn't afford medicine for their children, old men who hadn't seen a doctor in years. He treated them anyway, refusing payment. At first, he did it to fill the emptiness inside him, as if helping them could erase his guilt. But slowly, he began to see something he hadn't seen before: gratitude. Real, unfiltered gratitude. For the first time, his work felt meaningful. Healing no longer felt like a transaction, it felt like redemption. Still, the inner conflict raged on. His father's voice echoed in his mind, "Medicine is business, not charity." Those words haunted him like a ghost from the past. Every time he struggled to pay rent or buy medicine for his clinic, he would wonder if his father had been right all along. Could compassion truly survive in a world ruled by money? Was he being noble or simply naive? There were nights when he would snap in frustration, blaming fate for his downfall. But then he would see his wife sitting beside a patient's bed, comforting a child with a smile, her hands tender, her presence calming. In her, he saw what real healing looked like, and he realized that perhaps he had been blind all along. One rainy evening, while closing his clinic, a patient's family returned a young boy he had treated weeks ago for free. They brought him a small basket of fruits as thanks. It was nothing expensive, just a simple gesture. But the moment the doctor held that basket, something shifted inside him. He realized that what he received now wasn't money, but meaning. His father's hospital had been filled with wealth, yet empty of warmth. His tiny clinic was the opposite: poor in resources, but rich in humanity. For the first time, he didn't feel lesser than his father. He felt freer. That night he walked home under the rain, drenched but smiling faintly. His wife met him at the door, towel in hand, worry in her eyes, and as she helped him dry off, he really looked at her and felt something he hadn't felt before: peace. The storm inside him began to quiet. His rebellion had started in anger, but now, slowly, it was transforming into purpose. He had spent so long trying to prove his father wrong that he had forgotten what it meant to simply do what was right. Now, in the humble company of the woman he once married out of spite, he was learning to be a doctor again, not just by profession, but by heart. Just when life began to find a fragile rhythm, fate decided to test them in the cruelest way possible. The doctor's small clinic, once a modest symbol of hope, was struggling to survive. Supplies were scarce, bills were piling up, and some days there wasn't enough money to keep the lights on. Yet he and his wife carried on, believing that hard work and good intentions could outlast hardship. But destiny has a way of shattering peace just when you start to believe you've earned it. It began with a wealthy businessman, a man with influence, power, and connections, much like the doctor's father. He came to the clinic late one night, demanding an emergency surgery for his driver, who had been in an accident. The doctor immediately prepared for the procedure, but when he examined the patient, he realized something was wrong. The businessman wanted him to falsify records to make it appear that the accident was not the driver's fault, but that of another company, so he could claim insurance money. The doctor refused, calmly but firmly. "I'm sorry," he said. "I can't change the truth." The businessman's eyes turned cold. "Do you know who I am?" he hissed. "One word from me, and your clinic will be shut down tomorrow." But the doctor stood his ground. He had made mistakes in his past: pride, rebellion, ego, but this time he would not compromise his ethics. He operated on the driver, saving his life, but he refused to sign the false papers. True to his word, the next day, the businessman made a call. Within a week, the clinic lost its government support, its suppliers stopped delivering medicines, and the landlord began threatening eviction. The walls that the doctor and his wife had so lovingly built around their dream began to crumble. Money disappeared. Patients stopped coming, not because they didn't believe in the doctor, but because rumors spread that he was trouble. His license came under review, and former colleagues, the same ones who once admired him, now turned their backs. It was as if the world had conspired to punish him for choosing honesty over influence. The doctor sank into despair. His confidence, once slowly rebuilding, now shattered again. Every failure felt like a confirmation of his father's voice echoing in his mind. Compassion won't feed you. Principles don't pay bills. But amid this storm, his wife remained his only anchor. She refused to let the darkness consume him. When he stayed awake at night, staring blankly at the ceiling, she would sit beside him, gently holding his hand. "You did the right thing," she whispered. "We can rebuild everything, but you can never rebuild your soul if you sell it." Her faith in him was unshakable, even when there was nothing left to hold on to. She took odd jobs sewing, cleaning, tutoring children just to keep them afloat. Never once did she complain or blame him for their suffering. Her resilience became his strength, and her calm presence reminded him that integrity, though costly, was priceless. Then came the day that would break him completely, or so it seemed. One evening, as his wife returned from work, she collapsed at the door. The doctor rushed to her side, his heart pounding. She was burning with fever. He tried every medicine he had, but her condition worsened. The local hospital refused to admit her because of his ruined reputation. He begged, pleaded, but doors closed one after another. For the first time in his life, he felt helpless, not as a husband, not as a doctor, but as a man who realized how cruel the world could be when you have nothing left but your principles. He spent sleepless nights by her bedside, whispering prayers he hadn't spoken since childhood. "Please," he muttered to the darkness, "don't take her from me. She's all I have." Days blurred into nights, and just when hope began to fade, her fever finally broke. She opened her eyes, weak but smiling, and said in a hoarse voice, "See, even storms pass." Tears streamed down his face, not of sorrow, but of relief. He held her hand tightly, realizing that everything he thought he lost, wealth, power, recognition, meant nothing compared to the fear of losing her. In that moment, tragedy became his greatest teacher. It stripped him of pride and pretense and left behind only truth. He finally understood that real strength isn't the ability to control life, but the courage to endure it. His wife's suffering taught him more about humanity than all his years of medical school ever had. He saw how fragile life was, how precious every heartbeat could be when love and faith held it together. And so, when the dawn finally broke after that long, dark storm, he rose not as the proud man who once defied his father, but as a humbled soul who had been broken, tested, and rebuilt by love, by pain, and by grace. The night his wife's fever finally broke marked more than her recovery, it marked his rebirth. The doctor, who had once defined success by prestige and power, began to see life through a different lens. Sitting beside her, holding her fragile hand, he realized something profound. The people who truly love us do not stay for our wealth, our status, or our titles. They stay for who we are when all those things are gone. That realization hit him with the quiet force of truth. It wasn't just his wife's endurance that saved him. It was her unwavering belief that goodness would prevail, even when the world offered only darkness. The next morning, As dawn spilled golden light into their tiny apartment, the doctor walked to the window and watched the city wake. He thought about how far he had fallen from luxury to simplicity, from power to obscurity, yet, for the first time, he felt at peace. His rebellion against his father had once been fueled by anger, but now he saw it differently. It was never about defying his father anymore. It was about discovering himself. He finally understood that his father's pride had blinded both of them, one by arrogance, the other by resentment. And though life had punished him harshly, it had also freed him. With his wife's recovery, he returned to his clinic not out of duty, but out of purpose. The clinic was still struggling, but the people hadn't forgotten his kindness. One by one, they began to return: a mother with her child, an old man with shaking hands, a young woman seeking hope. They brought small tokens: a basket of fruit, a loaf of bread, a simple thank you. These gestures, once meaningless to his younger self, now carried a value greater than money. Every smile he healed, every life he touched, felt like another brick in the bridge of redemption he was building between who he was and who he wanted to become. Word of his sincerity began to spread quietly through the town. People started calling him the doctor with a golden heart. He had no advertisements, no wealthy sponsors, no modern equipment, yet his waiting room was always full. The poor came because he treated them with dignity. The wealthy came because they trusted him. What he had built with honesty and compassion now spoke louder than the empire his father once owned. His clinic wasn't just a place for healing bodies, it became a sanctuary for broken spirits. And through it all, his wife remained beside him, managing the front desk, greeting patients with the same warmth she had shown him on the day they met. One evening, an unexpected visitor arrived at the clinic: his father. The old man looked different now, older, slower, his arrogance replaced by weariness. He had heard rumors of his son's success, not financial, but moral, and curiosity had led him there. When their eyes met, the years of bitterness between them hung in the air like unspoken words. For a long moment neither spoke. Then the father said quietly, "You've built something beautiful here." The son didn't reply. He simply nodded, unsure whether to feel anger or forgiveness. The father sighed. "I was wrong," he whispered. "I thought power was everything, but you've done what I never could. You earned respect without buying it." Those words shattered the wall that years of silence had built. The doctor felt his eyes sting, not from pride, but from release. It wasn't the apology he had imagined, but it was enough. For the first time, he saw his father not as a rival, but as a man, flawed, human, and perhaps just as lost as he had once been. They sat together for hours, speaking softly, not as father and son divided by ego, but as two men finally understanding each other. His wife served them tea, smiling quietly from a distance, knowing that healing had finally reached where it was needed most: the heart. From that day forward, the doctor carried himself differently. He no longer chased recognition or compared his life to others. He understood that redemption isn't about erasing the past, it's about learning from it. He had lost everything once, only to realize that true success is not measured by what you gain, but by what you give back. His wife's strength had taught him love, tragedy had taught him humility, and forgiveness had taught him peace. Every morning, as he opened the doors to his small clinic, he would glance at the old stethoscope hanging on the wall, a gift from his father from years ago. It was scratched and worn, yet priceless. It reminded him of the journey that had taken him from arrogance to awareness, from rebellion to redemption. He smiled to himself, thinking how strange life was, how the very choice he once made to spite his father had led him to discover the greatest truth of all: that love and humility heal deeper wounds than medicine ever could. The reconciliation with his father marked the beginning of a new chapter, one filled not with grandeur, but with quiet grace. Life did not suddenly become easy. The struggles of daily living continued, and the doctor's clinic still faced challenges, but something had changed within him. The bitterness that once clouded his heart had lifted. He no longer lived to prove anyone wrong. Instead, he lived to make things right for his patients, for his wife, and for the man he had once called an enemy. his father. As weeks turned into months, his relationship with his father slowly began to heal. The old man started visiting the clinic often, sometimes bringing small donations of medicine or equipment. He watched silently as his son worked, speaking gently to patients, laughing with children, and treating even the poorest with the same respect as the rich. Each visit softened the father's pride a little more. It was humbling for him to see how much his son had achieved with so little. He realized that while his hospital had grown rich in money, his son's clinic had grown rich in humanity. For the first time in his life, the father understood that compassion, not capital, is what truly sustains a legacy. One afternoon, the father called his son to the family mansion, the very place that had once felt like a battlefield. The doctor hesitated but agreed. As he stepped into the grand hall, memories flooded back, echoes of arguments, raised voices, and broken dreams. But this time, the air felt different. His father was waiting in the study, the same room where years ago he had declared, "You are no longer my son." Now, with tears in his eyes, the old man said, "I was wrong then. You are more of a man than I ever was." He handed his son a document, the ownership papers to his hospital. "It's yours," he said, "but only if you promise me one thing, that you will run it your way, not mine." The doctor stood silent, overwhelmed. He didn't take the papers. Instead, he placed them gently back on his father's desk. "Father," he said softly, "I don't want your hospital. I have my clinic, my home. What I want is your blessing." For a moment, the old man was speechless. Then, with trembling hands, he placed them on his son's shoulders and whispered, "You have it, my son. You've always had it. I was just too proud to see it." That moment, more than any property or fortune, was his true inheritance. In the months that followed, the father began to spend more time at the clinic, helping where he could. He became a quiet observer, often sitting in the corner, watching his son treat patients with empathy and grace. Slowly, his hardened heart began to thaw. One day, as he watched a child thank the doctor with a handmade drawing, the father smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that his son had never seen before. Later, he confided, "I built a hospital to heal bodies. You built a place that heals souls. I finally understand the difference." Those words were the greatest reward the doctor could have ever received. His wife, too, was part of this transformation. The father, who had once dismissed her as beneath their family, grew to admire her strength and kindness. He often found her organizing community health drives, visiting sick neighbors, or teaching children about hygiene and care. He began to realize that the woman he had once rejected had become the very heart of their family. During one visit, he told her quietly, "You've given my son something I never could piece." Her eyes filled with tears, and for the first time, he addressed her not as "that girl," but as "my daughter." As time passed, the clinic flourished. Donations came from unexpected places, grateful patients, former colleagues, even strangers inspired by the doctor's story. What began as an act of rebellion had transformed into a beacon of compassion. The doctor no longer needed wealth or fame. His reward was in the lives he touched, in the smiles he restored, in the legacy he was quietly building through goodness. His father, now an old man with fading strength, often sat by his side not as a superior, but as a student learning in the twilight of his life what true success really meant. Years later, when people spoke of the doctor and his wife, they didn't talk about his rebellion or his fall from privilege. They spoke of the man who healed the poor with love, of the couple who turned hardship into hope, of the son who taught his father the value of humility. Their story became a legend not because it was grand, but because it was true. The doctor had once married a poor girl to spite his father, but he never expected that the very choice made in defiance would lead him to the greatest wealth of all, love that endured, forgiveness that healed, and a legacy built not on pride, but on purpose. And so, in the end, the story came full circle. A young doctor who once sought revenge against his father discovered that rebellion may ignite change, but only love can heal what anger breaks. He married a poor girl to defy his father, but he never expected that she would teach him everything his wealth never could: patience, humility, forgiveness, and the courage to stand for truth. Through her eyes, he learned that success means little without compassion, and that pride is the costliest disease a heart can carry. His journey from pride to peace was not easy. He lost everything: status, fortune, and recognition, yet in losing it all, he found himself. And when life stripped him of privilege, it also gave him the gift of perspective. For the first time, he understood that the real purpose of being a doctor was not to build empires, but to build hope. The man who once lived to prove others wrong now lived to make others right. The son who once hated his father became the reason his father learned to love again. And the woman who was once looked down upon became the foundation that lifted them all. Because life has a way of humbling the proud and rewarding the pure. It takes our anger and turns it into wisdom. It takes our pain and transforms it into purpose. And when we think we've lost everything, it often means we're being taught what truly matters. So remember this: the richest people are not those with the biggest houses or the finest titles. They are the ones who have learned to forgive, to love deeply, and to live honestly. The doctor married a poor girl to spite his father, but he never expected that through her, he would heal not only his patients but also his past. And that, my friends, is the greatest medicine of all: love.